Okay, so I've come up from where I was pointing out those really odd, those oddly satisfying looking Torrey pines, and now I'm back a little bit further up from where I parked. I'm actually in this little turf area of some very interesting coniferous trees. So I was earlier on, I was over that way in the Trees for Health little trail. Now I'm over here at this park about 100 yards away, and I'm here with a really neat diversity of Araucariaceae. And these are plants that are these are coniferous trees in the Araucaria family. So what we have are several different species of Araucarias here, and another species related in the Araucariaceae. So we have here these really crooked, narrow columnar trees that you see planted all over coastal Southern California. And these are called Cook Island pines. They're not true pines. So whenever I'm referring to anything Araucaria related, a lot of times they're called pines, but it's only because they're conifers. And we all know that all pines are conifers, but not all conifers are pines. So we have these curious ones that you see, and they're almost always crooked. They might start off straight for the first several years of their lives, but once they start getting past the sapling stage, they almost always have a lean to them. And that is very common here on the Cook Island pine. And this is Araucaria columnaris. Columnar because it's a very narrow crown, but it's not straight columnar. You can see, sometimes you'll see 70, 80 foot tall specimens in it. Always have a lean. And you see here, this one's got a lean. This one most certainly has a lean. It's actually starting a new leader over here. This one's got a lean. So Araucaria columnaris, Cook Island in the Pacific, in the southern hemisphere. And they have these branches, these little branches here, that actually, the individual needles don't fall off. And that's very common with these type of Araucarias. As you see here, the branchlets themselves fall off. So the branchlets fall off instead of the individual needles. So that's why you're going to see on this bottom, the leaf litter. So this is an extremely commonly planted tree here in the city of San Diego, and for much of coastal and near coastal inland areas that don't get severe freezing in the winter, as these are subtropical and tropical trees. Okay, now we're going to move on to another Araucaria, and it's this one here, and this is called Norfolk Island pine. Again, it's called Norfolk Island pine, but again, it's not a pine, it's an Araucaria in the Araucariaceae. And this one is native to Norfolk Island. What else is new? So this is another very commonly planted ornamental tree, especially in the more coastal areas, and again, near coastal inland areas that don't receive severe freezing in the winter, because these are, again, subtropical to tropical in origin, and their hardiness reflects that. So the thing with this one is this is closely related to the Araucaria columnaris, and sometimes it can be mixed up. Major differences. Well, let's look at some of the similarities. Just like in Araucaria columnaris, the branchlets fall off, not individual needles. These are all individual needles, which are all shaped. But again, just like with Araucaria columnaris, the branchlets fall off when they dry up. These are also pretty commonly planted here in San Diego and San Diego County, in Southern California for that matter. However, these trees, these ones are a little scraggly. These ones aren't quite the specimens that you typically associate with Araucaria heterophylla. Araucaria heterophylla grows very tall, and this time it grows straight, broadly conical crown. This is kind of how it starts off here. Broadly conical crown, and these trees can get well over 100 feet tall. I've seen some get very large here in Southern California. Araucaria columnaris can get pretty tall as well. These ones can probably, I don't know if I've seen them much over 100 feet tall, but they can get pretty tall too. But these ones were planted first, so a lot of the specimens here in San Diego of Araucaria heterophylla are much older, much larger. They've been around longer. But as you can see, broadly conical, a little sparser. The crown's a little sparser than on Araucaria columnaris. See, this one has a denser crown on columnaris. Heterophylla has spaced out tiered branches that are much less dense. So let me go ahead and take a picture of a couple of them so you can kind of see the differences between columnaris. The first ones will be columnaris and the other ones will be the heterophyllas. So I mentioned that these are conifers. They are cone-bearing trees like pines, but their cones are quite a bit different. But they're they are very much recognizably cones. Let's see if I can find a good specimen here. Sometimes you have to look pretty high up in the tree for these, and a lot of times these things will start branching till pretty high up. But the cones on Araucaria heterophylla and Araucaria columnaris are rounded and have little bits of spiky things on the end of the scales. Fortunately, we're not getting anything close, but they're kind of round shaped. You'll get some of these rounded structures in the branches. Those are the cones of Araucaria heterophylla. Cones up there. So this one definitely has some mature cones. Araucaria columnaris basically has very similar cones. The thing is, you're generally not going to find intact cones on the ground because they usually break apart and disintegrate. Right down there, in the middle of the screen, next to the blades of grass, that's a cone scale, and that's what a pollen cone looks like. So that's the male pollen cone that provides the pollinia, the pollen that fertilizes the female cones, which turn into those ball-shaped cones that usually disintegrate. Get looking and see the cones. He's going to assume multiple leaders. Occasionally, like this one here is going to have another leader here. Sometimes you'll see them with like 3 or 4 heads. Occasionally those will be multi-layered too, or multi-head. But let's go take a look at another species of Araucaria. So now we're looking at another species of Araucaria, and this is Araucaria cunninghamiana. This is called the loop pine, the hoop pine. Again, it's not a pine, it's an Araucaria, but it is a conifer. And this time, the branchlets are a lot smaller on Araucaria cunninghamiana. As you can see here, the branchlets are a lot smaller. But again, when they drop the branchlets themselves, not the individual needles. So here's what the foliage looks like a little bit more close up hand. Needles are a little shorter, still pretty sharp tipped, And this being an Araucaria, it also has rounded cones. Wishing these trees had cones closer to the ground so I could really see them up close, but fortunately, these rounded structures, the branches, are the rounded cones of Araucaria cunninghamii. So pretty interesting. There's one. Here's another one. And you notice the branches are much more upswept, and the crown is pretty sparse. These ones as well. Pretty upswept and pretty sparsely crowned. Most of its foliage is at the end of the branches, as you see here. So that's just something interesting to fathom. Okay, so we've looked at Araucaria columnaris, Araucaria heterophylla. Now we're looking at the hoop pine, the Cunningham pine. We're still not done yet. We're still not done. In this individual area, we got more. So let me go shoot a couple pictures of these Cunningham ones, the hoop pines, and we'll move on to the next species. And even after that species, there's still more to come. So there's a lot here. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the fourth species of Araucaria. Now, this one is called Bunya-Bunya, sometimes called Bunya pine. And this tree is native to eastern Australia. So this is yet another species of Araucaria. So you notice the leaves are a lot larger. They're still very sharp tipped, so be careful when you touch them. But the leaves are definitely not as huddled together as they are on the other three species of Araucaria: the hoop, the Cook Island, and the Norfolk Island. So, but then again, as in the case with the other three species of Araucaria, the branchlets, when the leaves die off, the branchlets are shed. So usually the branchlets will die together, again, like the other three species of Araucaria that I've pointed out so far. So now, out of the four that I've shown you thus far, the two most common are going to be your columnaris, Araucaria columnaris again, columnaris, and heterophylla, Araucaria heterophylla. Those are your two, by far, the most common cultivated Araucarias. Then if you're moving down the line, much less commonly planted, but sometimes it'll pop up seemingly out of nowhere, is your Araucaria bidwillii, the Bunya-Bunya. This is Araucaria bidwillii. Well, I've been talking about this the last couple of minutes. Again, these leaves are shed together on the branchlets instead of singly. So this is called a Bunya-Bunya. These can get very large. These can get up to over 100 feet tall as well. I'm pretty sure in their native habitat in eastern Australia, like in Queensland, I can't imagine how large they would get. They could probably get over 150 feet tall, I would imagine. But when you're looking at Araucaria bidwillii, you're looking at a much denser crowned species, much more densely covered in foliage, generally more so than Araucaria Cunningham, heterophylla, and columnaris. So usually a lot denser foliated, darker, richer, shinier green. And another major difference is their cones. Well, the other ones get some pretty decent sized cones. Bunya-Bunya cones get massive. These might actually have the largest cones of any conifer species, at least that I know of. And the seeds are known to be a local delicacy in Australia. Seeds are supposed to be edible. I don't know the whole thing about it, but Now I showed you the cone scales that fell on the ground with Araucaria columnaris. Look how much larger these cone scales are. Those are big cone scales. These cones can weigh more than, I believe they can weigh up to more than 8 pounds. These will definitely kill you if one falls off. Now, usually the cones are just like the other species. They disintegrate, releasing the cone scales and releasing the seeds to the ground. However, if a squirrel is jumping through a tree, it might knock a cone, and if it falls on you, most likely be fatal. It has possibly the largest cone of any coniferous tree in the world. I don't know if it's the largest or one of the largest, but it's even known to be deadlier than the Southern California native coulter pine, and even heavier than coulter pines, and even bigger than coulter pines. And their cones are on Bunya-Bunyas are very round, pineapple shaped. They look like big pineapples that fall out of a tree. So this is your Bunya-Bunya. Here's what it looks like when they're younger. They're very narrowly conical. They almost look like a spruce tree from a distance. They almost look like a spruce tree until you see the much wider needles on it. But here you go. Araucaria bidwillii. And then when they get much larger, their crowns are almost mushroom shaped. Kind of like conical shape, but also kind of mushroom shaped. Kind of like a conical mushroom shape when these get larger. Like when they're young, they look like a really rigidly formal conifer. Like a typical, really rigid conifer. But yeah, this is called Bunya-Bunya. And again, and one thing is, a lot of times you'll notice these little resin blisters. Very interesting bark on the Bunya-Bunya. The bark on the other Araucarias tends to be flakier, as you see here, with age. Okay, so I said we're not quite done yet. There's still more. I'm going to go to another species that's from a very different place in the world. It's not in the south, not in the South Tropical Pacific. So I'm going to go meet you over there, and we'll continue this discussion. Okay, let's move on to yet another species of Araucaria. So now we have this one here. This is the monkey puzzle tree, Araucaria araucana. Kind of looks a little similar superficially to the Bunya-Bunya. Very sharp foliage. Again, it's going to drop in branchlets, not individual needles. Only these trees are even more intricately, densely branched. And this is obviously not the best example in the world because it's kind of a young tree, but when they're young, they often start very conical, like a spruce tree as well. Kind of like Bunya-Bunya. Then, when they get much older, their native habitat of Chile in the Andes Mountains, they're very rounded. A lot of times they'll just have a big stalk and a big, small rounded crown on top. And that would be your Araucaria araucana. And this one lives up in the mountains of Chile. So this one is definitely more cold tolerant as well. So this one is less necessitating of subtropical climates. This one has more cold tolerance and even snow tolerance. So that's Araucaria araucana, monkey puzzle tree. But get a picture of that, and then we'll talk about one more species of Araucariaceae. Alright, so we got one more species of Araucariaceae. And it's this tree here. This is in the genus Agathis. Now this could be either one of two species, Agathis australis or Agathis robusta. Agathis robusta would probably be the more likely candidate. I'm not really super fluent in how to tell the two apart. I've come across Agathis robusta on several occasions, and maybe come across Agathis, the other Agathis, maybe once or twice. So the Agathis, they call them damar pines. And again, they're conifers. These are true conifers. They are not pines again. And they have cones that are quite similar to Araucarias, more rounded and pretty much disintegrate upon maturity as well. And they have very broad leaves. I think you'd be more likely to see individual leaves fall off from the Agathis species than you would Araucaria. I want to go over to another small one over here. We'll take a look at this one as well. So here's another Agathis species right here, or another Agathis specimen, I should say. So this is, like I said, more likely this is going to be Agathis robusta, but it could be Agathis australis. But again, the Agathis species, again, both have broad leaves, and yet these are still conifers, and they are in the Araucariaceae. Kind of interesting, the mottled pattern bark on these trees here. This one's a little bit larger, but I've seen some specimens here in Southern California that have gotten up to like 60, 70, 80 feet tall. A good place to see these, a lot of places in parks like this, but also in arboreta. If you want to see, I've seen some pretty good specimens of Agathis in the Fullerton Arboretum in North Orange County, and the LA County, the Los Angeles Botanic Garden, or the LA Arboretum, near the foot of the San Gabriel Mountains, also has some pretty tall examples of Agathis. I think the LA one has both Agathis robusta and Agathis australis. The one in the Fullerton Arboretum has Agathis robusta, I know that for a fact. But there you go. Another very interesting thing about the conifers here. I'm just going to go throw out a couple of other conifers and other families that we have here. Of course, we've got cypress trees here. This one, I think this is a, let me see, is this a juniper or a cypress? There are no cones on it, so I can't really tell. As appears to be. I'm wondering if this is a golden Monterey cypress, Cupressus or Hesperosapyrus macrocarpa aria. I'm wondering if that's what this is here. Here's something that's very much not conifer related, but the bow tree, Ficus religiosa. In Asia, this is a very sacred species of tree. The name religiosa means sacred. You got these guys here. These ones kind of smell like Italian cypresses. I think these are Italian cypress, Cupressus sempervirens, but if you have Cupressus sempervirens, the ones that you're used to seeing are the ones that are really impossibly narrow, really skinny, narrow trees that are planted in rows in yards and business districts. I think this also looks like Cupressus sempervirens as well. Yeah, much smaller cone. So this is definitely not going to be Hesperosapyrus macrocarpa, the Monterey cypress, even though these do look kind of similar. These appear to be Italian cypresses here. Again, these are not the really extremely narrow columnar ones you might be used to seeing lined up in rows in people's yards. When they are not in that horticultural form, which is usually the cultivar stricta, is usually the cultivar with extremely narrow crown. These ones can be definitely a little bit broader and a little bit less tidy. And what I mean by less tidy is less, you can see branches whipping all over the place sometimes. And to me, actually, I find that very, very enticing, because I like a little bit of wildness in my plants. But yeah, cones are definitely smaller than the Monterey cypress. The Monterey cypress cones are much larger. The term macrocarpa refers to the large size of the cones, and that's a New World cypress. The New World cypress, like the Monterey cypress, the Paiute cypress, the Tecate cypress, the Baker cypress, the McNabb cypress that grow in the southwestern United States, the Arizona cypress included, are considered they're New World cypresses, and they've been assigned by a lot of botanists in the genus Hesperocyparis, which means western cypress in Greek. Oh, a little ground squirrel. Good morning, or good afternoon, little buddy. Now, the Old World cypresses are always referred to in the genus Cupressus. Now, the New World cypresses, like the Tecate cypress, all the cypresses you find here in California and the Southwest, a lot of botanists still use the old name Cupressus. So you're going to alternatively see Cupressus or Hesperocyparis when you hear about cypress trees native here to the western United States. So that could be a source of confusion for some people. And then sometimes they've even been placed in different genera, such as Calotropsis, and a couple of them in other genera as well. And some that were formerly in different genera, like Coniferous, have been now bulked into Hesperocyparis / Cupressus. So taxonomy in the Cupressaceae is very confusing, very interesting, and it's neat to see the relationship between them. But yeah, Italian cypress tends to have more cylindrical cones as opposed to rounded golf ball shape like the other cypresses. And the needles, the scales, the branches are a little finer and smaller, the branchlets. The bark's very similar. Very common in Cupressaceae to see bark like this. Furrowed, sometimes stringy, grayish color. That's very common in Cupressus and Hesperocyparis, and in Cupressaceae in general, and especially including Cupressus, Hesperocyparis, Calotropsis, Coniferous, Juniperus. A lot of them tend to have gray, stringy bark, of course with lots of exceptions, which I'm not going to bother going into for the scope of this video's sake. But yeah, it's very, very neat looking. So this is what the more wild Italian cypress trees look like. This is what you're going to be expecting to see in the wild. Sometimes multi-trunked, sometimes it will be a little bit narrow, and sometimes they'll have more of a broadly conical crown. So, pretty interesting right there. Pretty interesting. This is another cypress species. I'm not sure what species this is, to be honest with you. I don't think this is a California native. I really can't honestly tell you what species this is here. I really don't know. But it has kind of a lemony, resinous aroma. I'll have to look that one up. Let me get some pictures of that. This one's kind of interesting looking. This one's got a little bit more of a glaucous grayish blue color. There's something a little bit different about this bad boy right here. I'm not sure which this one is either. Kind of embarrassed not to know, but sometimes you learn by finding stuff you don't know and looking it up. So it seems like Cupressaceae is pretty well represented in this park too. See, this one's a little more glaucous colored than the darker Italian cypress trees. So this is something different. This right here, though, this looks like the commonly cultivated Leland cypress. Hesperocyparis lelandii. It used to be known as Cupressocyparis lelandii. If I remember correctly, it's a cross between the Alaska cedar, Calotropis nucatensis, or Hesperocyparis nucatensis. That's another one that has a very confused taxonomy. So I'm not going to go too far into all that. But then it also has hybrid stock with Hesperocyparis macrocarpa, the Monterey cypress. Now this one is a strictly cultivated plant. It's very fast growing, but it's very short-lived, and it is prone to disease. These are very handsome, fast-growing trees. I've seen these plenty of times, but I think they've fallen out of favor over the last few decades due to the fact that people have been noticing them dying back. They get diseases very easily, which is pretty sad. Disease pretty easily, and die back as well. They definitely do not do very well in super far inland climates. Because one parent, the Monterey cypress, grows by the coast, and trying to grow that inland, it's susceptible to canker diseases and other fungal rots that are very devastating to it. And then the Alaska cedar, I'm pretty sure it's the Alaska cedar. It's got to be the Alaska cedar is the other parent as well. And these cones are actually quite small. See, Alaska cedar cones are really small, but whereas Alaska cedar cones are very small, the Monterey cypress cones are quite large, almost golf ball sized. So this kind of reflects the difference, the intermediacy between the tiny Alaska cedar cones, which usually only get to about this large here, as large as the one by my thumb. Very small. Like I said, Alaska cedar used to be in the genus Pinaceae, sometimes brought down to Calotropis, and sometimes Cupressus / Hesperocyparis. So it used to be Cupressocyparis lelandii, now it's just Hesperocyparis or Cupressus lelandii. So that's Leland cypress. So this is a garden cultivar, and you can see the way the branches grow is very akin to a young Monterey cypress. The young Monterey cypress, which is very conical in its youth. But then, that's where a lot of similarities are brought up between Leland and Monterey cypress. Now, the Alaska cedar similarity comes into play because the leaves and branches are in flat sprays like this, and that's where the Alaska cedar parent comes into play. So growth form is similar to a young Monterey cypress, the young conical one before they get all windswept and stuff like that, but the flattened spray of foliage come from its Alaska cedar hybrid, or Alaska cedar parent lineage. So it's kind of interesting how you can see the intermediate characteristics between species of trees when you look at them. It's just really interesting. And of course, we also have some Pinaceae. We have Torrey pines here, Pinus torreana, subspecies torreana. We also have a small Italian stone pine right here, Pinus pinea. Unless that's actually, I think those are actually Aleppos. Actually, those are Aleppos. Yeah, those are Aleppo. Well, hold up. Let me go over there and make sure. Actually, we have both of them growing here. This is Aleppo pine, this is the Aleppo pine, Pinus halepensis, right here. Pinus halepensis, Aleppo pine. This is the Italian stone pine, Pinus pinea. These are both from the Mediterranean areas. See, Italian stone pines usually have a very broad, oval-shaped crown in maturity, and Aleppo pines have very irregular shaped crowns in maturity. And the Aleppo pine cones are smaller and lighter weight. And the Italian stone pine cones, I don't know if I'm going to be able to show you any from here, are a little thicker, a little heavier, and have much larger edible seeds in them. And the cones are more rounded in shape, and they're heavier, and they have much larger edible seeds. The seeds on the Aleppo pine are small and winged. So that's just another aspect to the conifer diversity in this little park. Okay, now we actually have a Monterey cypress. Okay, so we're switching back to Cupressaceae again. So we're leaving, these are pines, so this is Pinaceae. Now going back to Cupressaceae, that's a Monterey cypress. Hesperocyparus macrocarpa. That's a Monterey cypress. Back to the pines. We're looking at, I told you we saw some Torrey pines. There's a very large Torrey pine over there. That's a very large one. And here is another conifer. It won't think is a conifer when you look at it. This is called Araucariaceae gracilior. Used to be known as Podocapraceae gracilior, and also confused with another taxon called Araucariaceae falcatus. So the taxa are kind of confused with this one. So this one, it looks like it bears fruit. These fleshy, drupe-looking fruits, which are actually just seeds with a fleshy pericarp around them. So this is technically a conifer, and it's from Africa. So you see here, the leaves are kind of intermediate between what you'd expect on a broadleaf and what you'd expect on a conifer, kind of narrow. Now, looking down the canyon, it's going to be hard to see, so I'm going to try to zoom in quite a bit. We have redwood trees, and that's another Cupressaceae. These trees right here, those are coast redwoods, Sequoia sempervirens, and those are obviously California natives, A, and B, the tallest known species of tree on Earth, got up to nearly 380 feet in height. So those are coast redwoods right there, over on the other side of the freeway. I think this is gonna pretty much wrap it up on my conifer video. Thanks for watching. Check out some of these conifers for yourself. Conifers at Balboa Park. Hopefully I can get to see some more conifers at another date. Of course, Canary Island pine, Pinus canariensis. So one thing before I leave, what do Canary Island pines, Aleppo pines, and Italian stone pines have in common? Besides being pines, besides the obvious. They're closely related. They're in the same group of pines. So, just a little trivia for you. I think that's going to do it. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on another juicy plant-related video soon.